Walking into the SWAC tournament, Alcorn State men's basketball is the hottest team in the SWAC, point blank, period. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On to get $20 off your first purchase. We wrap up today's episode with a look at the SIAC Championship game, and Clark Atlanta brought it in because they had a variety of scorers, which is something that Miles College did not have. Prior to that, the SWAC is now done with their regular season, and in Saturday's season finale, the state of Alabama was the biggest winner. However, we kick off today's episode and we keeping it all the way southern. Alcorn State out there in Mississippi is the hottest team in the SWAC. And I mean that men's and women's. I understand Jackson State women's basketball, undefeated. When you've won every single game this year, calling you hot is not it's not applicable. It's not appropriate for you. You're not on a hot stretch. You are dominating. So they aren't even in that terminology category for me. Alcorn is the hottest team in the SWAC, men or women. And when you look at what they've done over this 9-game winning streak, y'all heard that? 9-game winning streak. When you've seen what they've done over the last month of action, I don't think that this is a debatable statement. There's no team who has won more games in a row. Remember, when we're having this conversation, we're removing Jackson State women's basketball. They're dominant. They're the most dominant team. They're the most controlling team. That's the squad. Everybody else is in this category. Now we're speaking about everybody. Alcorn is the hottest team. They've won the most games in a row of anybody in any point during the season. Alcorn going into the tournament may be the scariest team that you'll see. They're in the top three. In the top three, at least on the men's side, is Alcorn, Grambling, and Texas Southern. Whatever order you want to put them in. They also so happen to be the top 3 seeds. But let's go into why Alcorn, because they all are the most dangerous or one of the 3 most dangerous for a different reason. But let's get into why Alcorn is, and it's what I've been pointing out this whole time. It's the fact that they haven't lost a game in over a month. The last time that they lost a game was February 5th. We're now sitting here about a week and a half through March, and they haven't lost yet. 9 games in a row. So let's look at it. I'm actually a fan of this stretch outside of the Texas Southern victory. I wish they had won 8 of the last 9, but that would really change where things are. That TSU victory was so extremely important that you can make an argument that knocking off Texas Southern was the most important victory that Alcorn State has had, at least in this stretch and maybe in this entire season. Because had they lost to Texas Southern, only TSU, if they had lost only that game in this 9-game winning streak, you wouldn't be looking at the 2 seed in the SWAC. You'd be looking at the 4 seed in the SWAC. The fortunes of the Braves are significantly different if they don't win that game. But we're not playing what ifs. And I'm not trying to. I just want to point out how important that game was. If you don't beat Texas Southern, who knows how we're looking at you right now? We might not even be having this segment right now but they did, right? And with that victory, like I said, they are now elevated up to the 2 seed. They now stand above Southern. They now stand above Texas Southern. There's no tiebreakers that need to be had. They sit there alone and knocking off teams like Texas Southern, knocking off teams like Jackson State, knocking off teams like Bethune-Cookman. That's what makes this so impressive. Now, a 9-game winning streak is impressive regardless. I don't care who you beat. Winning 9 games in a row in conference play, because you're going to play teams that are pretty close, if not your equals, or maybe even better than you. You're going to play those teams in a 9-game stretch. And depending on how you feel about UAPB, who was the first team out of the tournament, you could argue that in this 9-game winning streak, Alcorn has 3 to 5 solid to real quality victories. That's a good amount of victories in a 9-game stretch. It is. So Jackson State, playoff or tournament team. Bethune-Cookman, tournament team. Texas Southern, tournament team. Those are 3 really top-notch victories that you can't take away from them. And it's not an easy thing to do, like I said. You look at teams like Grambling, allow me to venture outside of the conference for a second. You look at Norfolk State, men's basketball. Norfolk State lost to Maryland Eastern Shore. They shouldn't have lost that game, but sometimes you get got. And sometimes being that consistent for that long, or not sometimes, but just being consistent for that long is a very difficult task to accomplish. You tend to slip up. And yes, they had tough times. Would I have liked to see them behind Prairie View A&M in the second half? No, I wouldn't. But their response to being behind PV was more impressive than me looking at, oh, how are you down? Man, I've seen teams barely get away from Mississippi Valley State. And in my opinion, playing close games, being in certain situations, it prepares you, right? So it's like treated like a training camp. What we used to do in football, at least I was going to go martial arts, but let's keep it with football. Back in my day, way yonder, right? But back in my day, what we used to do is and I'm sure they still do it, we used to have sudden change drills. So what that would mean is we just had a turnover the defense had to guard inside the 10-yard line. You never wanted that to happen, but you had to be prepared for that situation. Now let's apply that to how this is, because this isn't putting yourself in a situation to prepare for it, but it's having been in a situation such as being down 8-9 points against PV and knowing how to rally back, such as against Texas Southern, losing that momentum, if you believe in momentum, losing that, and then saying, you know what, we're still going to respond and come out with a victory. It's about being in situations and not panicking because you know how to operate because you've been there already. I believe that Alcorn, in addition to being the hottest team, is uniquely situated for this. They've been a top-level team. They've been battle-tested, and they've won a lot of games in a row. I'm very interested. It's them, Grambling, and Texas Southern for me, who are the most dangerous teams in a very congested SWAC where anybody could come up with the championship. As we push forward, there's 2 teams who made it on the last game, Alabama State, Alabama A&M, and that's just one of the reasons that the state of Alabama is the biggest winners coming out of the SWAC men's basketball finale, and we'll explore the ripple effects of it as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Allow me to tell you about my favorite 2 things about the Fire TV. One is the display. I love how open it is. I love how I can see all of my options. There's no, let me scroll down 5 times and finally see if this app is there. They give me suggestions on new things to watch. They give me a large display of all of my favorite apps, and they do it very seamless. It doesn't feel forced. It seems natural, and it's a nice display. The second thing that I love about the Fire TV is that you don't have to have specifically the television in order to use it. You can also use the Fire Stick, and you get all of the same capabilities. And speaking of the capabilities, one of the newest things that Fire TV has is the Fire TV channels. And that gives you a constant source of all of your favorite sports actions and brands, including Locked On. That's right. You can go ahead and see the mouth of the South on the medium screen. Get yourself a Fire TV, prepare for March Madness, prepare for the opening weekend, prepare for the NFL draft, and all of your sports action with the Fire TV. Go to Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. That's Amazon.com/LockedOnFireTV. Today's episode is also brought to you by Gametime. And Gametime is the best place for your last minute ticket deals. A friend of mine, man, I hate that he didn't do this, but a friend of mine called me while I was at SmackDown. I was at WWE SmackDown just this last Friday, and he said, man, I'm thinking about if I should do it. The Rock is there. I want to be there. But he missed The Rock. And you know why? Because he waited too long and he went to the wrong place. Where he should have done is went to Gametime, because Gametime is the best place for last minute ticket deals. He said, man, D, I think I waited too long. I didn't have the heart to tell him you should have went to Gametime. You should have went to Gametime, because that doesn't happen. Whether it's wrestling, whether it's a football game, a basketball game, a concert, a comedy show, whatever it is that you are watching or wanting to attend, you can go to Gametime and you can find those tickets in your local area. All you have to do is go to Gametime. And if you're new to it, go there, download the app, and create an account and use the code Locked On. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first of its kind live sports 24/7 network on YouTube. Go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe. Now, we've looked at the hottest team in the conference, men or women, and that is Alcorn State men's basketball. Well, let's keep it with the men and tell you about the state of Alabama, not specifically Alabama A&M for 8 minutes, not specifically Alabama State for 8 minutes. We're looking at both, because the state of Alabama was the biggest winners in the SWAC men's basketball finale. I could point out Alcorn because they did have some large gains. They were able to make it to the 2 seed. But the fact that Alabama A&M and Alabama State are on that short list for the biggest winners as individuals, I felt like lumping it in and saying the state of Alabama in general. So let's get into it. There were 9 teams who were in the playoff race. The SWAC tournament has 8 squads. There was 9 teams who were in that playoff picture race. Grambling was the only one who couldn't move. They're the only one who didn't have any mobility. They were the number 1 seed. They were the standalone champions. That wasn't going to change. That didn't change. That was the only known. Everybody else could have went somewhere else. Then you have teams like Prairie View, who they were out the picture. They were the ones taking the picture. And they ain't had no timer. They couldn't post it up and then run in there. They weren't getting there. But of the ones who were in the picture, they were still moving, except for Grambling. So let's look at Alabama A&M and let's look at Alabama State, because chaos ensued in the final game of the regular season. In that Saturday window, you had Alabama A&M versus Southern, and you had Alabama State versus Grambling. Obviously, both of the Alabama teams needed to win, and they got that victory. It ended up being that Alabama A&M didn't need it, but going in, they felt like they needed that victory, and they were in. If you win, you're in. That was Alabama A&M situation. You win, and you're in. For Alabama State, you needed to win and get some help. All of that happened. Alabama A&M was in a spot where if they won, they were the 7th seed. If they lost, they had the opportunity to be the 8th, but they won that game, and now they're at 7. Alabama State, they needed to win, and they needed a UAPB loss, and UAPB fell, which isn't surprising. They were facing Alcorn, but they lost to Alcorn, and with that loss, combined with a double overtime victory by Alcorn, that is, or not by Alcorn, a double overtime victory by Alabama State, that combination led to the Hornets making it into the playoffs. So let's get into, because like I said, it's how Alabama State won, because it was extremely dramatic, very intense. Nothing happened to Grambling. They're still number 1. They still don't share the title. They're the regular season champions, stand alone. So for them, it was nothing. Alabama State was able to win in dramatic fashion, in very intense fashion, in double overtime, and then they were able to secure themselves the 8th seed. Let's put a pin in that. Then you look at Alabama A&M versus Southern, and this was one I was really interested in, because Alabama A&M was playing for their tournament lives. Granted, they didn't know it at the time, but UAPB losing led to them also securing a spot. They could win by, or they were in by either winning or UAPB loss. And then when they won, the trickle-down effect that happened up top. That's where all of this comes into play. Like I said, Grambling was number 1. So that was nothing. Nothing happened from there. Alabama State was number 8. What Alabama State gets in return for a double overtime victory over the number 1 seed is the number 8 seed in an opportunity to do it again. See if they can pull off that upset back to back. They open up the SWAC tournament against Grambling in the first game of the tournament. So that is your reward. You get to face that same team again. It should be some good action. It was good the first time. It was good the second time. They split that matchup. So let's see Grambling versus Alabama State number 3. But when you get to Alabama A&M versus Southern, it's not just about what the victor received. Alabama A&M secured the 7th seed with a victory. They were already going to be in the tournament because of UAPB's loss, but their victory secured them the 7th seed. But then you look at the impact it had on Southern, who was the number 2 seed coming into the weekend. They are now number 4. Alabama A&M did that. You look at Alcorn, who was 3. They continue their 9-game winning streak. We looked at that at the opening of the show. They now move up to 2. Alabama A&M did that. And they needed that because a tie with Southern was not going to work for the Braves. Then you look at Texas Southern. They were number 4. A tie with the Southern Jaguars did work for TSU, and they were able to get that tie because Alabama A&M did that. So when you look at the overall ramifications of Alabama A&M knocking off Southern, you had Southern knocked down 2 spots. You had Texas Southern rose 1 spot. Alcorn rose 1 spot, and Alabama A&M was secured in the 7th seed. Tell me how this was not the most impactful and influential game in the SWAC men's basketball finale this past Saturday. It doesn't make sense to me. When I tell you that the state of Alabama is the biggest victor, it's because the 2 schools who were there both were able to win and secure themselves a spot in the big dance or the medium dance, however you want to phrase it, right? Because the big dance is kind of the cliche reserved for the NCAA tournament. No copyright infringement over here. So they were able to secure themselves a spot in the SWAC tournament. And then the ripple down effect makes it the most impactful. When you look at the overall weekend, Alabama A&M, Alabama State, Southern, Texas Southern, and Alcorn were all affected. That's 5 teams who were touched by the outcome of these 2 games. And that's what we're looking at. The most impactful and the most impactful, influential, and the biggest winners come from the state of Alabama in SWAC men's basketball. And I'm excited. We'll be breaking down the games we want to watch on Wednesday's episode. So it'll be kind of like a preview on that day of some of the action that'll be happening on Wednesday. Some of it'll be happening on Thursday. We'll do the same thing with the MEAC. That'll be up on Wednesday. So I'm very excited for that. We'll come in and we'll discuss that then. So in the meantime, though, we're going to keep pushing forward and we're going to look at the SIAC, keep it Southern, and the championship is coming back to the A. Clark Atlanta is your 2024 SIAC men's basketball champions. So let's explore how they received this or how they led to this as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. If you ain't a small business owner using LinkedIn, what are you doing? If you are a small business owner, you better be using it. If you're not using it, you just better not be a small business owner. It's just that simple because they have over 800 million people on LinkedIn who visit on a daily and weekly basis. It is your job to make sure that your company runs smoothly, and the person who can help be your conductor or whatever spot on the train that you need is on LinkedIn. It's that simple. If you want to build a good football team, a good basketball team, let's do basketball. You need guards, you need some paint presence, you need some defenders, you need some facilitators, you need some scorers. You need all of these roles to be filled. Your job is no different. It's the team for you. So go to linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. You can post your job for free. So it's all reward, no risk. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. We've looked at the SWAC 2 times now. Hottest team, biggest victors over the weekend. We've looked at that. But now let's go to the Division 2 level, but keep it Southern. Who am I? I am the mouth of the South. Let's keep it Southern. And let's look at the SIAC. You had the men's basketball championship out there at Savannah State, and you had Clark Atlanta versus Miles. And this was a game that I was very interested to see. Before we get into the game itself, something I thought was interesting is, I believe it was either Simone Stanley or it was a part of the broadcast crew play-by-play. I don't know. It was somebody on the crew, but I think it was Stanley. She mentioned, hey, Clark views themselves as the bad boys. And that explained the middle fingers that were thrown up at the end of the quarterfinals matchup. Is they view and they embody themselves as the bad boys here. And that explains that move. Now let's get into the championship, because there was none of that when it came down to getting the ring. It was none of that. Clark was in control of this game pretty much the whole time in the second half. Excuse me. They were in control pretty much the entire second half. And Miles did battle back, make a strong comeback at the end. But it was too little too late. And the reason it was is there was not a lot of offense for Miles. That wasn't the case for Clark. For Clark, they had 3 very strong options, and it felt like at times there was no answer for them. Miles had one, Alvin Miles. We're just going to call him Alvin to avoid the confusion. But outside of Alvin, Miles had no offense. No offense on the day. You look at Corey Trotter, because he's the guy who's the second leading scorer on this team. He made a comment after the semifinal game that he felt like he let his team down offensively, and he knew he had to show up, and he played well, and he played like that. That was his mentality. So I must question, where did that mentality go when it was championship time? Because I didn't feel like he was nearly aggressive enough. He only put up 4 shots. The only people who put up less shots than him were players who played 1 minute and 2 minutes. That's it. You weren't aggressive enough to be the second option for your team when you have been that all year, and you weren't aggressive enough to be the second option in the most important game of the year. That's my problem. I wanted him to search out for his shot more. But it's not just him, because nobody was scoring. He's just the second guy. So we expect him to play at a certain level. But nobody was getting any buckets outside of Alvin. Alvin Miles was the only person that was scoring for the team, and he rose into the 20s. There wasn't another player in double digits. There wasn't another player who shot remotely efficiently. The next closest player made 3 shots, and it was all threes, right? You look at a guy like Ballard, he didn't really get it. He made 2 shots. And I think they were both in the last 5 minutes or last 10 minutes, somewhere in that range. Like there was no offense. And where you saw it the most, because it was one thing when Miles was down in the lead or the deficit for them, but it just kept gaining, right? When Clark just started putting more of a distance, it was one thing. But there hit a spurt in 11 and a half minutes left in the game where Clark just stopped scoring. The problem was Miles couldn't score either, because nobody was getting buckets outside of Alvin. It was a 6-minute span in which Clark didn't score at all. Not a free throw, not a jumper, not a three-pointer, not a layup, not a dunk, nothing, not a point. They were stuck at 52 for about 6 minutes, and Miles put up 7 points. That was the issue. Even when you learned how to stop Clark, because they weren't doing it the whole game. When you learned how to stop Clark and you put a true freeze on their scoring threats, you didn't have any scoring threats to be able to make up that deficit. So once Clark said, let's flip this switch, let's lean on our guys, let's get Chris Martin to get in there and make a really difficult layup through a lot of contact, and let's get back on the board, you hadn't made enough of a dent in the gap. You just didn't. And that was it. Clark, when they needed to, they could go to their guys. Miles didn't have anybody to really go to. No disrespect. You had Alvin, but you need a secondary option because once you take away that one guy, what is everybody else going to do? And even Alvin had a difficult time because Clark got some long defenders, long limbed guys, like just arm up, block, block. And it was shown because once Chris Martin made that big time layup, the following possession, you had Shamani Fuller, who had a big time block on Alvin Miles. So I'm not trying to sit here and say he was just this force to be reckoned with and nobody was helping him. It was difficult for him as well. It was very difficult for him as well. But he was the one who started to figure it out. He was the one who said, all right, I'm going to get Kane, who was a strong defender in the paint. But if I pull you out to the 3-point line, I'm faster than you. And not only am I faster than you, you're their best rim protector, but I got you out here on the perimeter. So when I get past you at my speed, I'm going to have a much easier time finishing. That's what happened. But eventually, that didn't work. And there was nobody else who could do anything. You didn't have a guy like Trotter. You didn't have a guy like Carter. You didn't have a guy like those two who are your second and third leading scorers who could come in and be somebody else. Let's flash over to Clark. Because that was strong defense. They were way too long. They were good at guard. You had Chris Martin, who is your conference player of the year. You had Jalen Naismith, and you had Shamani Fuller. Those three players all scored in double digits, and your your SIAC player of the year was the least of those scoring threats on that particular day. If you can have your player of the year be the third leading scorer in a championship game and win, that is a testament to your depth, in air quotes, because at the end of the day, they didn't go that deep into the rotation. They pretty much played the starters all game. All the starters played 30 minutes, I believe. So like 30 or more in a 40-minute ball game. Like they were the majority of the game, but it showed you how many threats that you had. Because there was a point where Naismith was the guy who was going crazy. He was getting by people. He was finishing with the left hand, with the right hand. Then you had Fuller, who I think might have been the MVP. He should have been the MVP, had the biggest block of the game, had the most points in the game with 20. Then you had Chris Martin, who said, hey, we ain't scoring. We haven't scored in 6 minutes. I'm going to go get it. And he got it. And that was it. They could lean on their stars. And let's mention Kane, too. He only took one shot because the shot clock was winding down. And he just happened to be on the perimeter. He just had to chunk up a three. That was the only time that Kane took a shot. But the amount of shots that he affected on the defensive side is a big reason why they were able to come out victorious. This was an all-around quality team. You had strong paint presence with Fuller and Kane. You had strong guards play with Naismith and then also Martin. This was a team that you could tell they were the best squad. And the way they got here was a very close one in the opening round. Then they knocked off Benedict, who beat them in the regular season finale. Then they knocked off Miles, who was the first team to end their extremely long winning streak. I feel like this was the Get It Back in Blood tour. And that's exactly what Clark Atlanta did. They said, we're going to start it off with middle fingers. Then we're going to show those two teams who maybe thought they had a leg up on us because they beat us at the end of the season. We've been the best squad in the SIAC all year. We've been that. We are still that. And I will show you as we raise the trophy and get fitted for our ring. Clark Atlanta is your 2024 SIAC Conference champions. And we'll see where they'll be in the seeding. By the time you hear this, it'll already have happened. But by the time I'm recording it, y'all know how this goes. It hasn't. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. We'll go back to the MEAC tomorrow, looking at North Carolina Central, because it's kind of funny to me how they ended up back at the 2 seed, despite looking like they might have been the 4 seed going into the MEAC finale. So we'll do that on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.